This is the GamesIndustry.biz Microcast. I am James Batchelor, Editor-in-Chief of GamesIndustry.biz. I am joined by Head of GamesIndustry.biz, Chris Dring. How are you, sir?
I'm all right. I've just finished my last Gamescom appointment.
Nice.
I saw the folks at Level Infinite, which are eye-opening fact. They've got 1,000 employees.
I couldn't believe that when you told me, 1,000 people for... how many publishing labels have 1,000 people?
Well, they're not. It's a bit of a weird... They're not... There's a strange... They provide services for... You think the scale of Tencent's organisation, really. They provide a lot of... and some of those are technical staff, and they've got technical groups that support their centralised teams, and it's just... and they've got staff in every major country, and they've got people that look after free-to-play and AAA, and it is a monumental... And you don't hear much about them because they're sort of behind the scenes doing all that work on that publishing thing. But it was quite an eye-opening insight into that organisation.
Tencent are trying to cover the whole scale of games, gradually, over the course of their various businesses. I spoke to Juno Shin from Tencent earlier this week about Venture Lab, which is their support program for early stage developers.
Yeah, that came up in my chat as well.
Yeah, and he was saying that if you think kind of 0 to 1,000, Venture Lab is step 0 to 1.
Yeah.
And then Level Infinite is... You've had the exact same conversation.
They said the exact same line, yeah. They've had that chat.
Yeah. but it's an interesting structure on it, and it's interesting to see, Tencent, obviously, the largest games company in the industry, through the various business it owns, and, how well it does in China and so forth. It's interesting to see how big it's becoming and which parts of the industry it's working with. And
I think it's interesting, we're starting to see the fruit, all that investment they made in Western studios and PC and console away from mobile. I think we're starting to see that now. You look at Gamescom, look at their presence they've got here. They've got Dune, they've got that Exo Born game, which they seem very, very excited about. But I thought it looked a bit generic. But actually, I didn't think the game looked generic. I just felt like the name of it and the marketing. But it seems to be, there's a bit of excitement around it, so that's really great to see. And there was another game that they've done, the Path of Exile 2. So there's a lot of chat around that stuff, and they've got big presence here and a lot of big queues, and it's interesting to see. I wasn't planning to sit there and randomly talk about Level Infinite, but it's certainly a.
Well, last example, just to agree with your point, in Dying Light the Beast. I went to see Techland about Dying Light the Beast yesterday, and I completely forgot that's actually a Tencent project. They were on the Level Infinite bit.
It's the thing about Gamescom this year as well. It's these things. This is the industry consolidation. The Microsoft booth. You were just saying to me before we recorded about how it's Bethesda, Activision Blizzard, and Microsoft in one booth. And
which is the first time they've done that. So I was talking to someone on the Xbox booth yesterday, and they were, it's the first time we're all under... He said one roof. Obviously, the booth doesn't have a roof. But he means at the same time they're all within the same 4 very sturdy but definitely fake walls. Yeah. And he's right. I remember coming to Gamescom's past, and you would have a massive Bethesda booth, you'd have a massive Activision or a Blizzard booth, and Xbox, and they're all in this one place. And the Xbox booth, the bit I saw of it didn't seem much larger than previous Xbox booths. So I guess I don't know if that's a comment more on the lineup rather than the number of companies crammed into the space. But you're right. You're seeing so many companies. We're seeing kind of the results of those M&A sprees. Embracer and PlayOn are over in the different part of the same hall, and they've got multiple companies crammed into each of their booths because that's just how these companies are structured now.
Yeah. Well, then that's that consolidation and it does impact events in a way, right? You on the show consumer bit, which I think is a bit smaller at Gamescom this year because one of the halls isn't as big, isn't being used, and it's done me wrong. There's still if you're here for the weekend. Oh yeah, you are not short of things to do, but it's the obviously but you look at the Xbox booth, and that's where Warcraft is, and Diablo, and Indiana Jones, and Avowed, and Sea of Thieves, and it's all under, and it's also a bunch of third-party games, it's a. I don't get me wrong. The big platform booth always had some third-party titles, but it is noticeably a show that's. You can see some of that consolidation. Yeah,
you can. You can definitely see the overall market trends reflected here on both the floor of the business halls and the consumer halls. I've had a couple of people comment to me about we've discussed this before, but the absence of PlayStation and Nintendo is really being felt. I think again, like you said, it's not like there's a lack of things to play here, but they are a surprising and notable absence, particularly given that literally just before Gamescom was announced, they confirmed that both companies have got their September games that are coming out. There are playable demos for them at PAX.
Well, they've got presents at PAX. I know Zelda's playable.
Zelda's playable,
but the I don't think Gamescom. I think Gamescom would love them to be here. It's disappointing for Gamescom that they're not here. But I actually honestly think Sony and Nintendo have missed out.
Yeah.
Because this place is absolutely buzzing. It's rammed. There's a lot of very, very happy games publishers here. There's a lot of excited gamers, and Zelda's not here for them to play, and that's out in a month. And it's Astrobot's out in what, 3 weeks, 2 weeks. And there's no. Look at all the kids and all the families and all the parents that brought their kids here.
Yeah.
And I know they do things differently in Europe, and I just think it's. I'm sure the costs were very high and etc. But I was talking to a couple of journalists that are going to some press event to see to play Zelda and Mario Party at a press event, and they're like, "Oh, couldn't they just done it at Gamescom?"
Yeah,
it was just we saved us a trip and got us all done in one go. So there's just I think it's a bit of a I don't know what's that about. Like, there's some internal politics there.
I'd be intrigued to know the reason for that decision. There has to be one, but But as you say, going back to what you're saying about the size of the show, the consumer halls, the consumer play area where they go to play games feels a little smaller. As you say, one of the halls was closed, but some of the other areas feel a lot more packed. So Hall 10, you were saying, the indie arena is absolutely rammed.
Yeah, and I was actually, it's actually quite great, and there's retro stuff and there's some really cool things. There are a lot of actual games hidden, but that's the thing with Gamescom. There's a lot of games hidden here, and I have to say there was a few people that I've spoken to that when I went to the indie area, I'm a little worried about those games, and I am too. And there's a lot of these. I was walking around with a prominent industry person, publishing side of things, and they were saying that they looked at there was a big wall of people with a screen and a controller to show games to everyone. They're mostly sitting there on their own. They went, "What game hope do these games have?"
Yeah.
And I pointed out that actually I think you might be surprised. There's a Balatro there, and there's a thing like that. And there's a few. You might be surprised at what you might discover at these things. But it does feel like. On the one hand, there isn't enough games. On the other hand, there's just way too many.
There's far too many games.
And from a business point of view, even some of the big. I went to see Embracer Freemo today, and not today, this week, and I've been to see, as mentioned, Level Infinite. They've all got things that look interesting, and I thought it was quite fascinating. We had a little chat. I met 2 Point Studios earlier, so to see their new game 2 Point Museum, which I got hooked on and absolutely loved, and I was disappointed I got pulled away from it. And they point out that there's 3 Guildford games, right? That's just been announced at this show. They're one, Glowmade's one, we talked about in the last show, and Molyneux's new game, and it was like, he's like, isn't it great? And I was like, blimey, yeah, it's a lot of God's game strategy. I know it's Gamescom, God game strategy games, MMOs and PC games are the order of the day, but there is a lot of games, and it feels like everyone keeps talking about that stuff in the middle is the thing. Everyone's like, we don't know what hope do they have. The ones at the bottom, the lower end, there's less risk. They're smaller investments. You never know, one might break big. You might get lucky. You might find something. Game X might get $1 million. And we always hear there are countless stories of a game getting to $1 million or making $1 million or whatever. This sort of stuff. So which is more than enough for a 5-person dev team working on a couple of that sort of thing. But when you're all those ones in the middle that have pretty decent budgets and are being drowned out, it's tough. And we talked about that's an industry problem. We've talked about it quite a bit on the podcast over the last year, and you can see it here at Gamescom. However, the vibe is good, and I think when you've got people here playing games, talking about games, sharing games, it's a positive. And
as you say, the show floors are packed with consumers. We're recording this on the Friday of Gamescom. It's going to get even busier over the weekend. It's pretty crowded down there. I'm not seeing anyone sitting around bored. So, it's interesting. You're right. There are too many games. There are more games released than ever. I was talking to someone earlier this week about the fact that hundreds of games are released on Steam every day, and the difficulty of standing out. It kind of ties into DevCon earlier this week. Like a lot of the talks, as with most developer conferences nowadays, a lot of the talks are about finding your audience, standing out. There was one I went to about it's like finding your target audience before you've even revealed your game and knowing who you're targeting before work is too far underway on your game, like working out who you're even applying for, which, age-old problems. These are processes that developers should have been going through anyway. But it's more and more important now, and it's got to the stage where it's, again, wider industry conversation we've been having for a long time now. It's growing the audience and diversifying it. So the number of games released shouldn't be the limit. It should be, are there enough audiences out there, are enough players out there that want to get these games? The indie games we're seeing in the in Hall 10 aren't going to need to sell like millions of units. They just need to sell to the right hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people, like to break even. That's what we need. It's growing the audience so that there's a wider variety of players, a wider variety of tastes, and then finding better ways of reaching those people. No one has the answer to that. I certainly don't. Yeah. But it's an ongoing process that developers and publishers are all still learning from.
Yeah, it's definitely a interesting. But I found, generally speaking, I found Gamescom quite, in the business area, by the way, busier than ever.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
And absolutely chock full of companies. And it's definitely the biggest show. Everyone talked about E3 gone or E3's gone. It's here. It's just here, right? And I know that opening night live, some people felt it a bit repetitive, and there was a few two similar games in there, and it was too long and stuff like that. But it also saw some sizable announcements, and some of them bigger than what we got in June.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of. The industry worry and anxieties are still here, but there are some really good games here, and the industry's still growing. And if you're a consumer, on the people in the consumer halls you were talking about, they're not looking around thinking this industry's in trouble.
No. The idea that the industry is on fire is not coming across in the consumer halls. Absolutely not. No. Kind of don't want to go too much into this, but again, I've had a couple of conversations with people about 2025. We talked on the opening night live episode about how 2025 is looking increasingly crowded, or at least it's weird that we know so many things that are coming out 2025 this early in 2024. I say early, it's August, but at this point in 2024, I've been having conversations with some people like, is that an impact? Is that concerning for people? Like, as you say, like those companies that don't have a Grand Theft Auto coming out next year, are they concerned? And most people no, because the industry is hopefully stabilising. There's no good year to. It's impossible to avoid massive blockbusters wherever you release your title. Well,
yeah, but certain games are going to drown out press noise, and so it's going to reduce your avenues to. It depends on your game and how you want to reach consumers. And people talk a lot about how the media isn't important anymore. But there is actually a role the media plays, which is that they help discovery at the very earliest stage. So, if you ask, if you see that game that blew up and it's because this influencer covered it, well, how did the influencer discover that game? And you go, and it might be they saw it on a Wholesome Direct. How did the Wholesome Direct discover that game? And it's because it was on PC Gamer, right? Yeah. And it starts there, right? And that discovery goes up the chain. And when you've got launching a brand new game that might be very, very good, you want some critics you want maybe a critic reviews it for Rock, Paper, Shotgun, and they said, it's the best thing I've ever played. And an influencer sees it, they cover it, the game blows up, does very well. And you see that journey. But when Grand Theft Auto 6 is out, the media's covering Grand Theft Auto 6, so it's a bit of a thing. But what we want to get to a point. I'll be honest, the industry's always had this problem. There used to be a time when all the games came out at Christmas. Yeah. Right. We've got these sort of weird spiky years. Like last year, 2023 was this bonanza year of blockbusters. Yeah. Major titles, and the indies were we didn't get a look in. You saw some games like Mortals of Avium, and to a slightly lesser extent. Games like sort of Alan Wake and stuff like that. They did fine, but deserve to do better, I think, because they were next to these massive mega titles. And then you've got the this year where actually you've got opportunity for you to break through. If your game is special and it captures the zeitgeist, you might be, you know, the Black Myth game, right? And or the Helldivers and the Power Worlds and the Balatros, and you're seeing these games like dominate conversation, and I'm not sure they would have done last year.
No.
But next year you're going to have the 2023 problem again. So it's well, possibly. And one of the things that I feel, actually, you know what? One of the games that we keep talking about, Grand Theft Auto, Monster Hunter.
Yeah.
It's absolutely bonkers here. It is. I think it's probably stolen the show in terms of like noise and just attention and people swarming the booth. That brand, that strength now in Europe is phenomenal.
Before you even get into the building, like in like massive banner on like the south entrance, like there's no escaping that Monster Hunter Wilds is here. Yeah. Like I think I've seen more for Monster Hunter than I have for most other games. So yeah, it's like
I've always liked EA and Dragon Age. I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, that's the big Christmas RPGs, and everyone's talking about Monster Hunter.
Yeah.
That's not out until 2025. But that seems to be one of the bigger talking points here. And you know, we forget, you know, even if depending on Switch 2 launches, we know there's a Pokemon next year. These are big chunky games. I'm excited though. I say it like I'm saying it with like a sense of all nervousness for the industry, but actually it's great. It's just great.
I think that's just the Friday tiredness of it. It's day 3 of Gamescom. Day 5 for me because I did DevCon Friday. Well, no, day 4 for you because you got to us at DevCon on Tuesday. I think we are running out of steam a little bit. Like I only took the 1 year off Gamescom. I forgot how intense it is. I passed a couple of fellow journalists in halls yesterday, and they've only been here since like Tuesday evening, Wednesday morning. They're like, we are absolutely done because there's so much to cover. And that surely alone, that's another sign of the industry's health is that there's so much here for journalists to cover. And
I'm reassured. I was talking to a few journalists, and they are trying. Like it's really tough. They've got fewer staff now.
Yeah.
They've got big cutbacks, and they and obviously, in order to be successful in the media, you need to have traffic, and traffic is driven by the big games. But they are trying to branch out and try different things and reach, discover new games. And I was talking to one developer that was like, I didn't even know what their game was. About how IGN did a tweet about our game. It was the Death Sprint game that Secret Mode were doing, and it's done really well for us. Everyone's talking about it. It's really good buzz. It's like it's quite a small title, and yet it's clearly the media is trying, and it's difficult for them, I think. But it's nice to see they're busy. But I that's the thing with Gamescom. I think you do it for as many years as we have. You know. Yes, you want to see some good stuff, but give the opportunity to discover.
Yeah,
you want these accidents, those happy little discoveries. I've had a bunch of them here actually, so it's been good. It's been fun.
Chris, we're running low on time. Gamescom is drawing to a close, and so is this podcast. But before we go, I do, as tradition now dictates, I do have to ask you a question.
I'm on the edge of my seat. What? Oh, I'm nervous, James. What's the question?
The question is, what do the numbers mean?
Oh God!
Even in Cologne, you need to know, and you need to tell me what the numbers mean.
Well, I'll be honest. The what the numbers mean section, when we first came up with it, brainstormed the idea, was around actually looking at something that was coming up and trying to predict that we did, which I guess we did sort of last week. We talked about Zelda and the impact it might have on the Plucky Squire and stuff. But actually, we finally have a AAA video game launch that's happening next week.
It's ridiculous. We've got to the end of August before a major AAA launch.
Yeah, and it's are you looking forward to the major AAA launch?
I'm very much looking forward to the major AAA launch. I've been an apologist for the major AAA launch much of this week.
Well, I was trying to find a really unusual game to mention that's out next week, but I can't seem to find one. We're talking about Star Wars Outlaws.
We are, yes.
Why are you an apologist for it?
I don't know. It seems to be getting a bad rap in the press. Like the previews and stuff I've seen over the past year or so is it's a Ubisoft open world game, but with Star Wars.
I read 2 and it was glowing.
Okay, I've been reading the wrong articles because I'm looking at it's like, yeah, but it's a Ubisoft open world game, which they do them well, and it's very Star Wars.
It's a massive one though, right? It's not as in the studio massive, not just in terms of scale and size. They're a little different.
They are, yeah.
So it's an interesting one, Star Wars as a franchise. It's actually one of the biggest video game franchises in the world is Star Wars, but it's a very inconsistent one. And we've actually had about one major Star Wars release a year in the last couple of years. So last year we had Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which came out the gate and did very, very well.
Yeah.
I think by the end of the year, we don't know the exact. EA were a bit cagey on the numbers with it, but they said they're pretty happy with it. But it got to number 9 in the US charts for the year, so kind of charts, and it got to number 11 in the European charts as well. So Star Wars is not, oddly, you look at these data, you see Star Wars is ever so slightly less popular in Europe, or maybe because their chart positions, there just happens to be a few more games that are higher up the charts, I don't know. But if you go to the year before, it was Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga, and that was a real hit. We don't talk, it got sort of overshadowed by Hogwarts a little year later for Warner Brothers. But it was number 5 in the US for 2022, number 8 for Europe, number 2 in the UK that year. So Star Wars, the last couple of big AAA Star Wars launches have done pretty well. I don't think Jedi Survivor has actually done the sort of numbers Fallen Order did. Although I would put that down to the platform more than anything else.
Yeah.
It's more of a mainstream game. Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga did about 5 million in 2 months, and we didn't hear much beyond that in terms of sales figures being shared. But so you think this is it's like a safe bet, right? So it's out. It's the first major AAA launch of the year. It's been a long time since we've had a big game launch. The last two the Star Wars franchise seems pretty strong it's still inconsistent, pretty strong on console at the minute. It's a Ubisoft open world game made by one of their most established studios, right? This is as safe as houses. And if you look
a lot of boxes being ticked here.
Yeah. And if you look at the IGN wishlist data, which again is doesn't mean games are going to be a hit, but gives an indicator of excitement or at least interest. Star Wars Outlaws is the second for pretty much since last E3, but all year, last Summer Games Fest, but all year it's been the second most wishlisted game on IGN, which is behind GTA. So that's understandable. However, there is a little bit of anxiety around this game, I sense. There's a few reasons for this. Since Summer Games Fest, and Summer Games Fest came out early in the year, you look at the data, look at the wishlist data, it wasn't a huge spike for the game. So the game had a big spike last year, and then it sort of slowed down as we get closer to launch. That's always a sign of concern. Traffic around the previews has been hit and miss, if you look at some of the sites, in terms of people who've been reading the previews for Star Wars Outlaws. We're also... So the numbers are starting to... It's not entirely clear. The other concern is if you go back to the last massive title, which actually came out in December and actually was developed alongside this one, Avatar. Now, Avatar was a little bit disappointing. I think it's harsh to call it a full flop, but to give it into context, Assassin's Creed Mirage did 3 times the amount of sales as Avatar
front as a video. And it's worth reiterating that Assassin's Creed Mirage isn't even a full Assassin's Creed to the scale of Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla, or we've got Shadows coming up. It was kind of a spin-off as it was,
So the game was a sort of solid 7, 8 out of 10. It was okay. It was going to win the awards. It looked really good. It did come out quite late in the year during a busy period of video game launches, but it sort of faded away very quickly, and it didn't do big numbers. So there's that concern about this might be a new Avatar, in the sense that it looks good. The difference being, Avatar didn't have a lot of pre-launch hype. There wasn't hugely pushed by Ubisoft, and this one has been.
I'd also argue there's a few more Star Wars fans than there are fans of Avatar.
Well, yeah, but sort of.
Okay.
In film, Avatar's the biggest movie, full stop.
I still don't understand why, but carry on.
But obviously, you're right, in terms of as a video game franchise.
As a franchise, yeah.
As a video game franchise, Star Wars is a bigger video game franchise. On paper, Star Wars Outlaws is going to be a breakout hit. But there's just a little bit of uncertainty around it. There's the previews, you hinted on it a minute ago, some of them have been really positive, some of them have been a little bit lukewarm towards it. So I think the benefit it's got is it's basically the only show in town. And it has a bit of a runway. There are a few games in September, a few games in October, But the really big titles that people are talking about, the Dragon Age, Assassin's Creed, Call of Duties, they're sort of end of October, November time. So you've got this...
it's got a good couple of months runway before it gets drowned out.
And it gets drowned out, and then it's in the Black Friday sales. So there's a good chance it will be, it'll still get into that top 10 by the end of the year, and it'll still do pretty well. I'm just a little bit... if I'm going to predict, and this is the whole point of this, what are we going to predict? I think its launch will sit somewhere between Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which was a single-player linear title, and Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, which is quite a big breakout. I think it'll sit somewhere in between that. I think its long-term success will depend if the momentum keeps on, or if it's a sort of okay 7, 8 out of 10, then I don't think it'll be necessarily that big a Star Wars game. But as I say, Star Wars is a slightly inconsistent franchise. There are big breakout hits. There are ones that have sort of faded away. This one... My prediction is that it'll do okay. I think it'll have the biggest launch of the year. Not much competition in that.
No,
I think it'll have the biggest launch.
Biggest launch of 2024 so far.